DC. This is Wednesday, September the 6th, and we are coming to you live from our studios right here at the Rock Health and Wellness Center. And we are also streaming on Facebook Live, YouTube, um, X, formerly known as Twitter. And we are coming to you live on the radio, 98.7 KWBF FM, Walk by Faith Radio, 1420 AM, Lubbock Christian Nation, 987radio.com, and on the Live 365 App Store, or you go to the App Store and the Live 365 app, and you can catch us there too. So, really excited about tonight's show. We're going to break down a book called The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen, and he's been working on Alzheimer's for 30 years or so. And so it's going to be really cool. One of the things that I like to do is read. And so I'll just pick up books when I can about things that have to do with health and wellness. I really don't read any Harry Potter or Hank the Cowdog or any of that kind of stuff. I'm pretty much reading, when I'm reading something, it has something to do with your health and trying to help you be better and trying to help me be smarter when it comes to your health. And maybe there is something in Harry Potter that I'm missing. I hadn't read it. But so I've got a whole list of books that I would like to bring to us on Wednesday nights and just share the information that I have from the books. And when I break them down, sometimes it's a little bit different take that other people might have on the books. And so I'd like to every Wednesday night, we'll have a book review of some of the books that I've read and hopefully some of the books that I will read. So I'm really looking forward to this Wednesday night show. I think it's going to be great. And I appreciate all the people, and I appreciate all the feedback that we've gotten from the first few shows so far. Last night was kind of some circumstances outside of our hands. We just lost internet in the area. And so we were down on Facebook and we were down on the radio, and everything was silent there for a bit. I appreciate Bob Gray for helping us out. He came and worked behind the scenes to try to get us back online and get us trying. And we did that for a little bit. And then as soon as the radio show ended, bam, we were lost again. So I just decided that we would just retry it. We would just see if we could do this whole thing over again. And we'll do that show that we did last night, the Eating for Health show. We'll do it tomorrow night in its entirety. But there are parts of it that go along with what we're doing tonight. And so I'm gonna take a little bit of time and kind of take some of the information that was on last night's show and just go over it one more time. If you listen to last night's show for whatever time we had to do it, it'll be a little bit redundant right there. So if you want to text us during the show, we'll be glad to answer some questions. If you have some questions, our text line is 806-794-0400, and that's here at the office. Or you can leave us a comment on Facebook or YouTube, and we should be able to get those as well. So if you've got questions, because I know one thing about Alzheimer's is that pretty much everybody, if you haven't been touched by Alzheimer's disease, that you've probably got someone that that's been touched by Alzheimer's disease, and it is a miserable experience. When your brain quits working like that, and you just can't function, and it just eats away at you. My granddad passed away from Alzheimer's, so we know what that's like in my family. I've had staff members that have lost family members to Alzheimer's, and it's a horrible disease. And the thing about it is what Dr. Bredesen talks about, and some of the things that he presents. And I've listened to him in lots of different formats, and one of the things that he presents is that Alzheimer's disease might actually be a choice. Like, we might, knowing what we know today, that we might actually have a choice not to have Alzheimer's disease. And if you've ever dealt with it in your family and you've seen what it can do to a person, that might be something that we really ought to consider. So when I read these books, I appreciate the work. I'm not treating Alzheimer's disease. I'm not even endorsing all of the thoughts in the book. I don't have a lab. I haven't done the work in our office. This is a chiropractic wellness office. And you may be wondering, why are you doing books on Alzheimer's if you're a chiropractic wellness office? Well, it's a wellness office, right? And so we're trying to keep people well here, and we're trying to deal with all these things that cause us not to be well. And so the but and so when I'm reading the book, the thoughts that I have tonight, some of them are my own original thoughts, but pretty much everything that's coming to you tonight is just information that I got from reading the book and listening to Dr. Bredesen online. And there's a really great um, YouTube show that he did with Dr. Hyman. It's kind of a summary of the whole book. So if you'd like to go back and look on YouTube, you can find that video, that interview that they did together. And so we'll just kind of break it down, and we'll go through some of these thoughts. If you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask. And so we'll just get started. So the book is called The End of Alzheimer's, and not the last days of Alzheimer's, but really the end of Alzheimer's being can we get rid of this disease? And there's a lot of people working on it, and there's a lot of different thoughts, and you get the FDA working on it, and pharmaceutical companies working on it, and all kinds of things. Obviously, we haven't solved it. No one has solved it. And no matter what they try to tell you, no one has solved it yet. Dr. Bredesen's getting close. Some of the things that he does is getting close, but just like anybody else, you can go out there and you can find people that totally disagree with everything he's saying. And so I don't care. I don't care to get into the arguments about it. If there's something that we can talk about that might actually help somebody, anybody listening, to change their future or change the future of someone that they know that might be dealing with some of this stuff, that's why I want to present it to you. So his idea is maybe we can stop it. Maybe we can just get to the point where we stop it. And it's very complicated, because one of the things that the name of his book is The End of Alzheimer's, the first program to prevent and reverse cognitive decline. And that's the name of the book. So he's trying to prevent and reverse the decline. And what Dr. Bredesen talks about is that basically what Alzheimer's is, from a big picture standpoint, is a network insufficiency. And a network meaning there are multiple ways that our brain gets attacked. And there are multiple ways that we're losing cognitive function. And that's the problem with his presentation, that's a problem with pharmaceuticals, is that we're never going to find one pill. He uses the example of having like 32 holes in your roof. And if you have 32 holes in your roof, and you patch up one hole, you didn't really solve any problems, really. And that's kind of what pharmaceuticals do when it comes to this disease, because they're looking at for one thing. Is it a toxin? Is it insulin resistance? Is it some sort of omega-3 problem? Is it stress? What exactly is happening? Is it tau? Is it amyloid plaque? Those things that we know of. And what the idea is that it's all those things together. And somewhere along the way, we've got holes in our defense system. We've got holes in our growth system of our body. And when those things don't function properly, that's what ends up causing this decline. So it's not a one thing problem. It's a multiple level problem that we're dealing with. And if we want to solve it, which he's just done some research that came out and said that he had an 84% success rate in decreasing or actually reversing Alzheimer's disease. And so I get a little bit suspicious when I hear that stuff, because I don't know exactly what 84% means. I don't know I didn't read the study that Dr. Bredesen presented, but I know that there's that sometimes in medical work, and especially in pharmaceutical work, the way that they come up with those percentages is really bizarre to me. And I'll give you an example. If you have 100 people in a trial, and you split them in half, and you have 50 in one group and you have 50 in another group, and one group is the placebo group and one group is the drug group, and you follow these people. Let's say you follow them for 2 years, And in that 2-year period of time, in the placebo group, 2 people died. Let's just use death as the marker. 2 people died in the placebo group, and 1 person died in the drug group, in the trial group. Do you know how they'll present that to you? They'll present that to you as 100% effective. They'll say that that drug is 100% effective because there was double the amount of people, 100% more people died from the placebo group than died from the drug group. When in reality, 48 people out of the 50 people in the placebo group were fine, and 49 people out of the trial group were fine. And so when it gets into those percentages, it really does sometimes. I'm not accusing Dr. Bredesen of that. I don't know the answer of how he got his 84%, but the point of it is that he's done some work that has done some good for some people. And that's really what I want to kind of get into tonight and share. Alzheimer's disease is the most expensive disease in America. They're expecting that somewhere around 14 million cases by 2050, and 45 million Americans are expected to die from Alzheimer's disease. I mean, that's a lot of us, and there's a lot of people out there that might want to try to change things. And so it's a horrible disease, and it's an expensive disease, and it's a taxing disease on the families that have to deal with it. And so if we can do something with it, it would really be great. And when you get into Alzheimer's, it's kind of like, what exactly is Alzheimer's? Because we hear of Alzheimer's disease, we hear of Lewy body dementia, we hear of frontal temporal dementia. Um, there's a vascular dementia. There's different types of dementia, and dementia is an umbrella. If I can speak right, dementia is an umbrella term used to describe the range of neurological conditions affecting the brain that worsen over time. It is the loss of the ability to think, remember, and reason to levels that affect daily life and activities. Some people with dementia cannot control their emotions and their behaviors, and their personality may change. And so dementia is kind of the overview. And then depending on how the body is responding is how we get into each one of those different types of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is just one type of it. And Alzheimer's disease, the most common dementia diagnosis among older adults. Alzheimer's disease dementia is typically associated with abnormal buildup of proteins in the brain known as amyloid plaques and tau tangles, along with the loss of connection among nerve cells. These changes can be seen during life using a PET scan. So if you have amyloid plaque buildup and you have tau tangles, and those are, I'm going to get into a little bit of that as we go through here so that you can kind of understand exactly what that is. If you have those things, then they will diagnose you with Alzheimer's. If you have different types of proteins built up, then they might diagnose you with Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's disease, which is another form of that Lewy body dementia or disease. And then there's another one, there's different kinds of proteins that will build up in your brain. And when those proteins build up in your brain, basically what's happening is that your brain is unable to communicate with itself. So the synapses in the brain start to get disrupted, and the connections in the brain start to get disrupted by all these extra proteins. And what's really cool is these guys have finally come around from a standpoint of what exactly is causing that. Why are we having amyloid plaques and amyloid buildups inside the brain? And how exactly does that happen? So I want to break that down just a little bit here in a minute, but the stages of Alzheimer's, the first stage 1 is an asymptomatic stage. It means that you don't even know you have it. And that the only way you can detect it is if you were to look at your spinal fluid, if you were to do a spinal tap and you were to look at the contents of your spinal fluid, or if you were to look at a PET scan. And so there are early ways that you can detect whether or not you have Alzheimer's or you are developing Alzheimer's disease in this stage 1. And the thing about that is that that's a 20-year process. They consider stage 1 to last for usually 20 years. There are some accelerated ways that you can get Alzheimer's, some early onset Alzheimer's, but for the majority of those cases, you're asymptomatic in stage one and it lasts for 20 years. And then you get into stage two and it's subjective cognitive impairment, where you're starting to lose some of your memory. You're starting to realize what's going on. You can't put things together exactly like you did before. And that's a 10-year process. So really, when we look at these first two stages of Alzheimer's, we're actually looking at a 30-year process right there that says, man, like we might have, this is where Dr. Bredesen says, this is where we have a chance to really turn the tables on this. This is where we have a chance to get over it and to stop it. And so we'll talk about some of those ways that happens. And so the amyloid is really interesting because without getting deep into the biochemistry of it all, what happens is inside your brain, you have a nerve cell, and that nerve cell is going to talk to another nerve cell. So you've got this long nerve, and when you get to the end of it, it's got this little area, and it looks kind of like a glove with fingers on it. And those fingers are where the synapses are going to occur with other nerves. And then there's going to be information, there's going to be little chemicals that are passed through there that send the signals on. Well, right before that glove, right before the end of that nerve cell where those synapses take place, we get these little vines that grow off of that nerve. We get these little vines, and we're going to prune those vines. And to be really simple, what happens is if we decide to cut those vines in 3 cuts and make 4 pieces, that ends up with Alzheimer's disease and amyloid plaque. If we decide to cut those vines in two pieces, into 2 cuts where we end up with 3 pieces, that is actually protective and nourishing for our brains. So in order to get that amyloid plaque in the beginning, according to the book, is that it depends on whether or not we cut that little vine into 4 pieces, make 3 cuts, or we cut it twice and make 3 pieces. And so the question is, what's going to make us cut that vine twice, and what's going to make us cut that vine 3 times? And really, the answer to that is that our brain is under attack. The reason we create amyloid is when our brain is under attack. So if that nerve cell, and we went back, I will do this almost probably every show. I'll go back to that very first show that we had, and I'll go back and talk about innate intelligence, because it's one of the things that is missed in our world. People don't talk about innate intelligence. Like, there's not a conference that cell goes to learn whether or not it should cut 3 cuts or 2 cuts. There's not an infomercial that it's not like if you want to fix your faucet at your house, everybody just goes to YouTube now and just looks up that. If you want to fix your air conditioner or your dryer or whatever, right? Your brain doesn't have YouTube that it goes to. Your brain has innate intelligence. Innate intelligence is like the varsity team compared to YouTube. It has so much knowledge of exactly how it's supposed to function. And so what is happening is the brain is actually under attack. And the amyloid is created as an antimicrobial agent. It eats up copper and mercury inside the brain. The amyloid is trying to be a sponge to protect the brain. And that's what it's really trying to do. But in the meantime, what we got to do is we got to down-regulate. If we're being attacked, if we could go back in history and look at like World War I or World War II, when we were under attack and we were fighting a global war, there was a lot of rationing that was going on at home. There was a lot of things that people back home had to cut down on, and they had to downsize things whenever we were at war because we didn't have enough resources to be able to fight the war and keep home the way it was. Well, that's what happens inside of our brains. When our brains are under attack from multiple levels, from multiple areas, then the brain is trying to protect itself. And so what it's doing is it's actually creating amyloid because of the attacks that it's trying to do, and it's trying to downsize itself. And so it's like, oh wow. So you're it's like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting because it's like, you mean that the amyloid is actually innate intelligence that's trying to protect us from the outside? And it's like, yeah, that's exactly the truth. It is trying to protect us from the outside. And so that's really an interesting thought. It's trying to protect us from what? What is it that it's trying to protect us from? Well, we get into different levels of it. Your brain has to make that choice to decide what it's going to do. And there is a genetic component to Alzheimer's disease. And the genetic component really has a lot to do with this ApoE gene that you have, an ApoE2 or an ApoE3 or an ApoE4 gene. And it's really the ApoE4 gene is is um is has different functions inside the body. All of them do. The ApoE2, the ApoE3, and the ApoE4. Those are genetic. So you can actually do a blood test. We don't have the blood tests here in the office, but we can get those blood tests for you. And there's different places that you can get those blood tests to actually find out if you have that ApoE4 gene. And if you're not carrying any of the ApoE4 genes, then you have a 9% chance of developing Alzheimer's. If you have one of those ApoE4 genes, you have a 30% chance of developing Alzheimer's. And if you have two of those genes, if you got one from your mom and from your dad, you have a 50% to 90% chance of developing Alzheimer's. So if you want to know what your chances are based on your genetics, then that's something that is testable from the ApoE gene that you can look at and see exactly how many of those ApoE4 genes that you have to determine whether or not you're a carrier, um, that you're a carrier of both of those genes that might actually increase your chances of getting Alzheimer's. Because the function of what goes on there is that the ApoE4 actually downregulates making of proteins, and proteins that are inside the nucleus that actually help us to stay well. And so if you have one of those, it's kind of like a gene that like it doesn't want much growth. It wants to cut things back. It's always trying to conserve. And if it's trying to conserve in those proteins, one of the proteins that it makes that helps us is downregulated. And if you have two of those genes, it's like having two of those people in your house that are down regulating everything. It's like constantly down regulating the proteins. And that's what that ApoE4 does. So that increases the chances that we're not able to adapt very well to our environment if we're cutting that stuff down. And it's really interesting because the one thing that one of the proteins that the ApoE4 gene actually decreases is increased with resveratrol. And so we've heard of resveratrol as a supplement, and you may have taken that. And there's different forms that you can get that in like grape skins and apples and that type of thing. And resveratrol is actually counteracts the ApoE4 gene. So you can actually upregulate the protein that the ApoE4 gene is trying to downregulate right there. And so that's one of the things that's important to know from a genetic standpoint is you get into these ApoE4s, and we'll kind of show in a minute how there it was right there. It was on that next slide. It was that SIRT1, SIRT1 protein that gets shut down because the ApoE4 binds to genes in the nucleus and reduces the production of that protein. And so it also is associated with the activation of this bad dude called NF-kappa B, which promotes inflammation. And so another way to increase the chances of getting Alzheimer's disease is to be inflamed, to increase your inflammation. And so that's another way that you can increase that. And that's something that we deal with all the time. That's why we talk so much about in our office about omega-6/3 ratio, to make sure that we try to get that inflammation down as much as we can. We talked a little bit last night about it before we got cut off, when we were talking about the refined carbohydrates versus the complex carbohydrates, and we'll really get into that tomorrow. So um, we've we're coming up on a break on the radio show, and so I'm going to take just a minute and kind of take a break here because I really want everyone to be able to hear what we're talking about. Just remember that we're on the radio is 98.7 FM, Walk by Faith Radio, and you can get us on 987radio.com and on the Live 365 app. Just look for Walk by Faith Radio, and you can listen to it anywhere in the country. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Yeah, for the people that are listening to us online and on Facebook, it's really there's a different Dr. Bredesen. You can go to I believe the website. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Is ApoE4. Yeah, I'm not sure. But you can just Google ApoE4, APOE4, and then you can read all about it. There's a website. It may be .org instead of .com, but there's a website that will really get into what that means, what that gene means, how you can test it for yourself, how you can find out whether or not you have one copy or two copies or no copies. And then if you really have two copies and you've got those chances, you got that 50 to 90% chance of developing Alzheimer's, that might be something that really would get your attention and say, look, I've got to attack these and I've got to make sure that I'm doing all the things to get every part of it down. I got to get my inflammation down. I got to get my insulin resistance down. I got to make sure that all that stress is down. There's some things that I can do, and I need to do it now before I start to develop that. And if I've started to develop some symptoms, then I really need to do it. And if I've got a parent that's already started to develop those symptoms, then there's definitely some things that we need to do to to get them help. And there's some things that you can do. There's because it's if you can reverse the function, if you can get all of your like insulin resistance and inflammation and and toxins. One of the things that Dr. Bredesen is really strong about is how the toxins affect it. So like molds, like bacteria from your mouth, bacteria from herpes on your lip. Those are things that really are um, a part of all the autopsies that they do on patients who have Alzheimer's disease. When they do an autopsy on those people, they find those bacteria from the mouth or from the herpes, from the lip, from the different parts of the body. They find the funguses, the bacteria, those things that grow. Those are things that they get that they find inside the brain. So if you know that you're susceptible to it, then you might really want to pay attention to all of those different things to make sure that you're cleaning up your environment. And then, right after the break here, I want to get into some of the stuff that we talked about last night with the insulin resistance and the inflammation, because those are things that we can all do right now to help us with that. We'll break down all the different types. There's 3 or 4 different types of Alzheimer's, and hot Alzheimer's and cold Alzheimer's, and I'll kind of break down those and talk about what that means, and we can kind of see exactly what that means, so that you know where you might be susceptible to it. And that's the other thing Dr. Bredesen talks about is to that you're make sure that you're treating it the way that you've got it. Okay, everybody, we're back, and this is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we are breaking down The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen. And so we're going to get back to it. One of the things, so there's different types of Alzheimer's disease that Um, we've already gone through. There's hang on one sec. There's different types of Alzheimer's disease that, and every one of those types has different sets of symptoms. So type 1 Alzheimer's is inflammatory. And so and it's considered the hot Alzheimer's disease. In people with one or two of the ApoE4 genes, one copy symptoms start in the between your 50s and 60s, and with two copies symptoms start in the 40s and 50s. And so the you might that's where it might be important to know whether how many copies you have by getting that genetic test and finding out how many of those copies that you have. So this is increased inflammation, right? There's tests that you can do like CRP, C-reactive protein, that happens. That's inflammation in the liver. Decreased ratio of albumin and globulin. So your AG ratio, if it's low, then that's one thing that might indicate that you might be susceptible to this type 1 Alzheimer's. Increased interleukin 6, that's an inflammatory interleukin that creates inflammation in your body. Increased tumor necrosis factor, that's also something that creates inflammation in your body. And then insulin resistance. And that's a huge one right there, because going back to what makes us cut that little vine into 3 pieces, or make 3 cuts into 4 pieces, or 2 cuts into 3 pieces, what makes it basically what tells us to do that is whether or not we're in a fasted state with glucagon. If we have high levels of insulin, then the brain detects that it's under attack, and it will make those 3 cuts to create 4 pieces, and we'll end up with the amyloid. If the brain does not feel like it's under attack and it wants to get into what's called autophagy, and autophagy is basically just self cleanup. It's autophagy, and auto means it's ourself, right? So it's autophagy is what we get into when we're fasted. So we don't. If the studies that I've read over my lifetime that says that you want to increase in longevity, the one thing that you do to increase longevity is to decrease caloric intake. That's the only thing that I've ever read that says you will increase, that how you can increase longevity is decrease the amount of calories that you eat. And why is that? Well, because the body kind of is like a machine, not really, but kind of. And the body has to use energy to break down that food. And so the less food you eat, the less energy you use. And the less energy you use, the longer you last. It's really not that complicated. It's kind of like if you park your car in the garage and you drive it for 4 minutes to your work and 4 minutes back, and that's the only time you drive your car, that car is going to last a long, long time because you're not using it much. And so what autophagy is what is the cleaning. It's basically the self-cleaning. It cleans up the space. It cleans up the space in your brain. It cleans up the space in your muscles. It cleans up the space in your organs. Autophagy is saying, hey, we're going to clean up the insides of us, and we're going to clean it up when we don't have anything else to do, like break down food. And so the fasted state is how we get there. And the fasted state is where we get an increased amount of glucagon. We talked about it a little bit last night. And the fasted state is how we actually stay away from increased insulin. And that's what makes us determine. That's what makes that cell determine. Part of the reason, according to the book, that we decide to make 3 cuts or 2 cuts is based on whether or not there's high levels of insulin and whether or not we're in that fasted state. And so part of his treatment is called recode, and we'll get that to that in just a second. So insulin resistance is, again, a major component of a chronic disease. And we talked about that on last night, and we will do that again tomorrow night. 7 of the 10 causes of death are chronic disease. And there's no evidence that we should be making chronic disease. We should not be making heart disease. Genetically, we're not designed to make heart disease. Genetically, we're not designed to make cancer. Genetically, we're not designed to make kidney disease and liver disease. Genetically, we are designed to express health. If we put the cell in an environment that is congruent with health, we will express health. So That's type 1 Alzheimer's. Type 2 Alzheimer's is what they consider to be cold or atrophic. And atrophic means that if we have the inability to build, we're out of resources. So we don't have the ability to build and build ourselves back up. In people with one or two APOE4 genes, it usually starts a decade earlier than the 50s or 60s. So now you get into the 40s or 50s. Overall support for brain synapses have dried up when we're in this type 2 Alzheimer's state. And so what do we get when we're in this state? Well, we get low levels of hormones. We get low levels of thyroid, adrenal, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and pregnenolone. Those are all low. Our hormone levels are low. Our vitamin D levels are low. And here's insulin resistance again. And then we get increased homocysteine, which means we've got another level of inflammation in our body. And so those are kind of the things, but it's basically we don't have enough hormones to run our body properly. We don't have enough thyroid, we don't have enough adrenal, we don't have enough estrogen. And so one of the things that's that's one of the things about a statin drug. A statin drug stops the production of those sex hormones, the progesterone, testosterone, because in the metabolic pathway, those things are lower than where the statin drug kills it. Another thing is stress. Stress is going to increase cortisol, and the increased amount of cortisol is going to steal from being able to make estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. We're going to steal that because we're going to use the resources we have to make the cortisol in the adrenal glands, and we're going to steal from those other things. And so that's one of the things that is stress can cause that. We always wondered why my granddad got Alzheimer's disease. It was really interesting. He had a huge garden in his backyard all the way till his 80s. I mean, he was up on the roof fixing his roof when he was 80, and then all of a sudden it just was like it got him. But he spent a lot of time having stress. I remember he was a twin, and it was kind of a, I don't know, there was a rough life. Maybe he got picked on or something. But if you ever stayed the night with him, he would wake up in the night with these horrible nightmares and screams and stuff. And he would go through that stress at night. Well, you're already increasing your cortisol at night because you need to increase your blood sugar just a little bit because your brain needs the blood sugar. Well, if you increase the stress in the middle of the night, you're getting stressed out, you're increasing your cortisol, you're also losing sleep, which increases your cortisol, which causes the stress response. And then my grandmother passed away with Lou Gehrig's disease, with ALS. So he had to go through that whole process with her, and she was one of the longest living cases of ALS. She was like 16, 17 years she lived with it. And so my granddad had a lot of stress. And so as I was reading through this book, it kind of gave me a little bit of information about how, he might have had a type 2 Alzheimer's. Because he wasn't really inflamed. He ate all those good vegetables from the garden. He was a thin little guy. But the stress levels were super high. And so if you're under stress, and in the second show, we broke down how the brain fires up to the right and over to the left. And if you don't get that over to the left pathway, then you're going to stay in that right brain that fires that stress response. And that stress response is going to fire those adrenal glands, and those adrenal glands are going to release cortisol again. And then here we go. And so cortisol is going to increase blood sugar, and then blood sugar is going to increase insulin, and then now we become insulin resistant again. So that's the second type. And sometimes you'll get a combination of those, and it's considered to be type 1.5 Alzheimer's, and that's what we call the sweet Alzheimer's, the glycotoxic part of Alzheimer's. And now we've got chronically increased glucose, increased insulin. Insulin is no longer neurotropic, and what that means is insulin is no longer helping your brain build itself. A little bit of insulin is fine. A lot of insulin is not good for us. So that's type 1 and type 2. The type 3 Alzheimer's is the toxic one. And this actually switches. This is not an ApoE4 Alzheimer's. This is an ApoE3 Alzheimer's. And it usually doesn't run in families. You don't have to worry about it getting it from your grandma, right? It starts in the late 40s to early 60s. Great stress levels. There's high levels of stress. There's trouble with you get trouble with numbers or speech. You have strikingly low zinc and low triglycerides compared to cholesterol. Those are things that happen in this toxic type 3 type of Alzheimer's. And it affects many brain areas. So you're going to have lots of different symptoms that goes along with that. Um, it it's neuroinflammatory and vascular leaks. And so they catch those on MRIs where you actually are losing blood supply. Your low zinc, high copper, the ratio, it gets out of control, usually diagnosed with something else. So it's not just Alzheimer's by itself because it affects so many different brain areas. Now you can start having all kinds of different issues that are going on. And so it's usually with something else. Hormone imbalance, HPA axis is off. Remember, the right side fires. The right side fires the sympathetic stress response. We go through that whole amygdala, locus coeruleus, HPA axis through the adrenal gland, and then that HPA axis gets out of balance or is off, and then we get hormones that are off. It's I've been studying for 23 years pretty dang hard, and I'm telling you that up and to the right and over to the left means something. The power, the voltage, the amount of the power that you have up and to the right side of your brain to kick that over to the left and get that unknown situation out and away because you're looking for tigers. And literally you're looking for tigers. And that's causing lower brain escape. It's causing upper brain fatigue and exhaustion. It's causing lower brain escape, which is shooting straight from the lower brain into the spinal cord, into the adrenal glands, kicking off the stress response. And then here we go. It's out the gate right there. So increased mercury and mycotoxins. And this is a one where you get into all those toxins and bacteria that are in your environment. If you're around something that's got mold, or if you're not taking care of your teeth and you get the bacteria or something that's coming from your mouth, if you've got those little cold sores that come up on your lips, all those things are things that are considered to be in that toxic type 3 Alzheimer's right there that causes problems. And then, so what do we do about it? What are we supposed to do? And how do we fix this problem, right? So I'm just going to go through the recode steps, and I'm just going to read some of the recode steps that are just straight out of the book. And it's recode basically stands for reversing cognitive decline. And we're trying to reset everything that's going on. And number one, for each abnormality identified, we want to go beyond supply normal and get all the way to optimal. So, like if your vitamin D levels are low, if your zinc is low, if your homocysteine is not proper, if your copper levels are not proper, if your Ag ratio is not proper, we don't want to get to what is considered to be normal. We want to get to optimal. So if you look at vitamin D levels, for example, I think it's like 30 or 40 or something like that. If your vitamin D levels are over maybe 35 or something like that, they consider that to be normal. Well, we don't want normal. Last time I checked my vitamin D levels, it was 79. And especially this time of year when the sun goes away, I'll take 5,000 to 10,000 IUs of vitamin D all winter long, because that's part of the thing that keeps us healthy through the winter. If you don't know what your vitamin D levels are, you really should get those checked. We can actually do that here in the office, or you can go to your medical doctor and say, I want my vitamin D levels checked. And don't be afraid to get your vitamin D levels high. Now, if you have some sort of thyroid or parathyroid type problem, make sure that you're working with your medical doctor on that. But your vitamin D levels are, so you want to make sure that you go to optimal. We want to address as many of the abnormalities as possible, not just one. So it's not just one thing. It's not just insulin resistance. It's all 30 of those things. We got to patch all 32 holes in the roof, not just one. For each treatment, the goal is to address the root cause of the problem it targets. And so we're getting into the type 1, the type 2, the type 3. What exactly is the problem that you're having personally? What are you dealing with personally? And how do we address the things that you are dealing with? The RICO program is personalized exactly based on laboratory values we find to be abnormal. These are all Dr. Bredesen's RICO treatments. And just as for other chronic illnesses such as osteoporosis, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, there is a threshold effect. So you just get to a certain level where it just starts to spill over. The program has phases and tweaks. So there's feedback. There's feedback in it. We're just like, hey, look, we tested it. We tested our vitamin D. Our vitamin D is low. We took some vitamin D. We retested it. Okay, if we took vitamin D and we didn't get any better, then we may not be absorbing vitamin D. And I know there's some debate whether or not we should take vitamin D or not. I'll save that debate for a different time. What I'm saying is we've got to get your vitamin D levels up, and then if you're not getting it, then we need to tweak it. We need to go into and see, hey, what is your A1C? What is your C-reactive protein? Are you responding to the environment? Because one of the things that happens in Alzheimer's is that they treat it like that you work on your insulin resistance and you work on your inflammation, but you've got a mold or you've got Lyme's disease. You got bit by a tick somewhere along the way, or you've got some sort of bacteria that's growing in your mouth that is that's the thing that is really causing your problem, right? So when you're working on this, you got 30 years to work on it, right? But you ought to get started at it. And if you're already past that phase 2 and you're into that phase 3, and they kind of joke multiple times, like they call it mild cognitive decline, but it's not mild to anybody that's got it. If you've got cognitive decline, there's nothing mild about it, right? It's messing up your world, and it's really not fun. And so if you are in those phases and you start a treatment program and you retest and you don't get results, then you got to make sure that you got to go back and look at the bases that you might have uncovered. Drugs are the dessert, not the entree. Going to your medical doctor and whatever drug that they've got for you, they're all for Alzheimer's, it might be the dessert. And Dr. Bredesen, that's his statement, not mine, but his statement is also, he's not saying that taking a bunch of supplements solves the Alzheimer's problem. What he's saying is that it's a very complicated system approach to the whole thing. It's a network approach because it's a network insufficiency. And then the earlier you start the program, the greater your chances to complete reversal. So if you can catch it early, if you can catch it when you're young in that 20-year period or in that second phase, the earlier you can catch it, the better you got to reverse it. And for just about every element of RECODE, there is a workaround or a crutch if you need it. So don't lose heart. So that's what he's saying is, hey, look, if this one part's not working, then we'll modify and we'll see if we can make it better. And we'll see if we can make it that it can be even better. And so what kind of diet do you need when you're on this type of program? So what he calls it the Keto Flex 312 diet. And I'll see if I've got some of this information. But the Keto Flex, the Keto Flex 12-3. And basically is this. So your brain needs glucose to function. And it's very important that your brain gets glucose. But if you don't have glucose, and what you want to get your glucose from is your refined carbohydrates, right? And so your complex carbohydrates, not your refined carbohydrates. So if your body is in a starving phase, let's say you eat supper, let's say you're going to go to bed, you're going to go to bed at 10 o'clock. What you want to do is you want to eat no later than 3 hours before you go to bed. So if you're going to go to bed at 10, you don't want to eat anything after 7. So that gives you 3 hours before you get started. And then you don't want to eat anything for 12 hours for sure. So you don't want to eat anything from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So that's your 12-hour window. Now, if you have any signs that you might be dealing with it, then you add the numbers to it. If you have one of the ApoE4s, then you can add the 12 to 14 range. If you have two of the ApoE4s, now you can add the 12 to 16 range. And so you're going to go from 12, you're going to go from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then you're going to add 4 hours to that. And that's going to get you to 16 hours. So you're going to go from, that'll be 11 o'clock. So you're not going to eat anything between 7 p.m. and 11 the next day. And that's going to put you in a fasted state. And that's going to put you into autophagy. And that's going to tell your brain, hey, we're in cleanup mode. Just make 2 SNPs, not 3, so that we don't make that amyloid plaque. And that's one of the things is the fasting. And so during that phase, your body will start to burn ketones or ketone bodies. It'll start that in the in order for you to get energy, you got to start breaking down fats. And you break down your fats. That's why fasting works. Fasting helps you lose weight whenever you have an excess amount of weight, because your body's running off of the ketone bodies and you're making the energy. Instead of using the glucose that you have, you're using the ketones that you have. And so one of the things that he says is that we've got to get metabolically flexible. We got to be able to run off of ketones and run off of glucose at the same time. But the only way we can run off of glucose is if we're not insulin resistant. So if we become insulin resistant, now we can't run off of glucose because we can't get the glucose in the cell, because we got to get the glucose in the cell in order to use glucose as energy. But the only way we can get the glucose in the cell is to use the insulin receptor on most of the things. There's a couple of small blood vessels and unmyelinated nerve cells do not use insulin to get glucose in the bloodstream. And now you just diffuse it. And so I'll hold that for just a minute. And I don't know if we'll have time to get to it tonight, but we will definitely get to that tomorrow night. So the keto flex means that we're going to be metabolically flexible. We're going to go from glucose burning to ketone body burning, because we're going to go through that fast. And then we're going to eat a high complex carbohydrate meal. And when we eat carbohydrates, we're going to eat complex carbohydrates, not refined carbohydrates. So we're going to eat our asparagus and our spinach leaves and our broccoli and our cauliflower and the things that are complex carbohydrates. And we're going to stay away from refined carbohydrates, processed foods, white bread, even white potatoes, white rice, any kind of rice, really. That's one of the things that I did personally 18 months ago. I just quit eating sugar. I haven't had a piece of bread, a rice, pasta, pizza. I haven't had a corn chip. I haven't had chips and salsa in 18 months. It finally took me 51 years to straighten myself out. And I finally figured that out. And so when I eat carbohydrates, I eat complex carbohydrates as much as I can. And so that's what we want to do. We want to eat complex carbohydrates. We want to eat good sources of protein. We want to make sure that we have good eggs. We have free-range chickens. We have grass-fed meats. We have wild fish. We have the proper kind of fish. Those are the things we want to do. We want to eat berries and not so many fruits, just a little bit, but mostly raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, because that is very low in sugar and it gives us very low insulin. And then nuts from a tree like pistachios, walnuts, pecans, almonds, macadamia nuts. Those are all good to eat. Walnuts are the best because they're high in omega-3s. And then we want to make sure that we get our omega-6-3 ratio balanced. And we're going to get into that tomorrow night. But that's something that keeps our inflammation down as well. We want that to be below 3-to-1 when it comes to our omega-6-3 ratio. It's very crucial to help us in our process of being as healthy as we can. So that's basically an overview of the book. If you want to know more about Alzheimer's and from Dr. Bredesen, he's really good at it. He's been doing it for a long time. He can really help you out. And if you want to know more about it from me, then just give me a holler here at The Rock. And 806-794-0400 is our number. I'd be glad to sit and visit with you. I'd be glad you might have to do it after 7. I'm pretty packed from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., but we might have to get together on the weekend or something. But I will, because that is my why, and that's why I'm doing this show, because I want you to be as healthy as you can possibly be. And so if I can ever help you, please let me know. And I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night. We will be back. We'll be doing Eating for Health, and it'll be a great show. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you guys later.